She had been sitting in the lobby of Hargrove and Finch Consulting for 47 minutes when the shooting started. Not that Maren Quill had planned to be there that long. She had arrived at 9:13 a.m. with a manila envelope containing the corrected quarterly reconciliation reports. Her former boss, Dennis Hargrove, had called her back to deliver personally, 47 minutes. That was how long it took for Maren to realize that Dennis had not, in fact, called her back to collect the reports. He had called her back because he needed someone sitting in that lobby, a warm, unremarkable body, when the men he owed money to came looking for him. She figured that out at 10 a.m., right around the time the lobby's glass front doors exploded inward. The ice in Maren's paper coffee cup had gone completely watery by then. She had been holding it for so long, the paper had softened under her fingers, the cardboard sleeve peeling away at one corner. She'd bought it from the cart on the corner of Michigan and Wacker because she'd been too nervous to eat breakfast and her blood sugar was starting to drop, and she'd told herself, just one cup, just sit and wait. Dennis will be down in 15 minutes. She had worn her good blazer, the charcoal one she'd bought on clearance at the end of last season, the one that the sales associate had told her, made her look like she ran things. It was a little tight across the shoulders now. She'd told herself it didn't matter. It mattered exactly as much as everything else she kept telling herself didn't matter. Maren Quill was 31 years old, and she had spent most of those years making herself easy to overlook. She was soft where the world kept telling her she shouldn't be. Full hips, round arms, a stomach that curved gently beneath the blazer she'd ironed at 6 that morning. She wore her dark hair pulled back so tight it ached by noon. She kept her voice measured, her opinions to herself, and her desk the cleanest one in whatever office she worked in. She was the person who noticed when the quarterly figures didn't add up. She was never the person anyone called by name. She had worked for Hargrove and Finch for 3 years. She had discovered the discrepancy in October. A methodical, invisible hemorrhage of funds from the firm's third operating account into a cascade of shell entities she'd quietly traced over 2 weeks of late nights. She had brought it to Dennis Hargrove directly. She had trusted him. He had thanked her, told her she was invaluable, given her a gift card to a restaurant she'd never actually gone to, and then laid her off 6 weeks later, citing restructuring. She had come back today because he'd called her personally, voice warm and apologetic, telling her HR had mixed up her final documents and he needed her to swing by to sort it out. He had asked her, specifically, to wait in the lobby. She should have known. She had known. She had put on the blazer anyway. The glass shattered at 10:01 a.m. in one enormous, simultaneous implosion. Not one door, but all 4 panels of the ground floor entrance, caving inward as though something vast and inevitable had simply decided they no longer needed to exist. Maren threw herself sideways off the lobby bench, hitting the marble floor hard, her envelope sliding under a planter. The lobby erupted into screaming. The receptionist Dove behind her desk. 2 men in suits near the elevator banks bolted for the stairwell door. Maren stayed on the floor, not because she was calm, because her legs had simply refused to cooperate, and the cold marble under her palms was the only solid thing left in the world. From her position near the planter, she had a clear view of the lobby entrance. 6 men walked in. 4 of them she registered only peripherally, suits, earpieces, the quiet geometric certainty of men who moved like weapons. The other 2 she catalogued in the 2 seconds before her brain shut down analytical function entirely. One was broad and dark-haired and scarred across one cheekbone. He moved to the reception desk immediately, pulling the receptionist upright by her elbow with businesslike efficiency, speaking to her in a voice too low to carry. The other one stopped in the center of the lobby. He stood very still, which was the first thing she noticed. Not the height, though he was tall, not the tailoring, though even from the floor, Maren could register. that his jacket had not come off any rack. What she noticed was the stillness, the way the chaos of the room seemed to organize itself around him, the way weather organized around a pressure system. People fled toward exits, screams died to whimpers, and this man simply stood and looked around the lobby with the unhurried expression of someone taking inventory. His eyes were dark, not brown, something closer to the color of old iron, the kind that had been outside in all weather and come through harder for it. His jaw was sharp, his dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and he wore it pushed back from his face with what appeared to be total indifference to how it looked. He did not look like someone who cared what anyone thought about anything. His gaze swept the lobby and landed on Maren. She was still on the floor. She became acutely, mortifyingly aware of this. He crossed the lobby without hurrying. His shoes made no sound on the marble. He stopped 2 feet away and looked down at her with an expression that was not unkind and was not warm and was not. She realized with some dissociation the expression of a man preparing to do something terrible to her. It was the expression of a man performing a rapid and extremely thorough assessment. He crouched down, coming level with her. Up close, he smelled of cedar and something colder underneath, like winter air off still water. "Where?" he said very quietly. "Is Dennis Hargrove?" His voice was low and deliberate, the kind of voice that didn't need volume. Each word landed with complete finality. Maren stared at him. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. "I'm going to ask you one more time," he said, and his voice did not change at all, which was somehow worse than if it had. "Where is Dennis Hargrove?" Something snapped back into alignment in Maren's chest. Maybe it was the fact that she had already been lied to this morning, had already dressed up and shown up, and made herself small and careful and easy to depict for a man who was apparently hiding somewhere above her head right now, while she lay on the floor of his lobby. Maybe it was the fact that she had been laid off 6 weeks ago and she had cried in her car and then gone home and spent a week updating her resume. And something about that particular sequence of humiliations had burned through a certain kind of fear. "I have no idea," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I've been sitting in his lobby for 47 minutes, waiting for him to come down. He called me this morning. He told me there was a paperwork issue." She sat up, because lying on the floor while she talked to this man felt actively undignified. "I used to work here. He fired me in November. Apparently he needed someone to sit in the lobby today, and it wasn't going to be him." The man's expression did not change. His iron dark eyes moved over her face, with the same deliberate precision he'd used to scan the room. "Your name," he said. "Maren Quill. What did you do here, Maren Quill? Accounting." She pulled herself up to sitting, her blazer twisted sideways. One knee scraped where she'd hit the floor. "I handled fund reconciliation for the firm's operating accounts. All 3 of them." Something shifted behind his eyes, barely perceptible, like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. "All 3, he said. "All 3, she confirmed. She had no idea why she was talking. The adrenaline had done something strange to her filter. The 3rd one was the interesting one. Someone had been running money through it in a pattern that looked like ordinary vendor payments until you tracked the entity chains downstream. I traced it for about 2 weeks in September and October before I brought it to Dennis. He thanked me and fired me 6 weeks later." She looked at this terrifying man crouching in front of her in the lobby of her former employer and said, with the flat affect of someone who had already processed the worst of a thing, "I'm assuming you already know about the account." The man was quiet for a moment. "My name is Rowan Veth," he said. It landed like he expected her to recognize it. She did. Rowan Veth. The name appeared in the financial press occasionally, attached to the kind of investments that didn't generate press releases, and in the city's crime reporting not at all, which itself was a kind of statement. He was the head of what federal prosecutors, in the 3 unsuccessful indictment attempts over the past decade, had taken to calling the Veth organization. A quiet, methodical empire built on private equity fronts, port logistics, and the kind of influence that didn't need to announce itself. He was 41 years old. He had never been convicted of anything. "I know who you are," Marin said. "Then you understand," Rowan said, standing, "why I would like to know what you found in that third account." He extended a hand to help her up. She looked at it for a moment. The clean, deliberate offer of it, the way it was extended without presumption but without doubt either, as though he simply assumed she would take it, because taking it was the reasonable thing to do. She took it. His grip was firm and warm, and let go exactly when she had her footing. The vendor entities trace back to 4 shell companies registered in Delaware and 2 in Wyoming, Marin said, straightening her blazer. Her knee throbbed. The payment timing follows a wash cycle. Each transfer clears within 72 hours, and the funds resurface in a secondary layer of LLCs before moving offshore. "I have a spreadsheet." Rowan Veth looked at her. "You have a spreadsheet," he said. "I was a forensic accountant before I came here. It's a reflex." She looked around the lobby. The receptionist was still behind her desk. 2 of Rowan's men had fanned out toward the elevators. The other 2 were near the front entrance, watching the street with the patient attention of people whose attention was professional. "I kept a copy." Dennis didn't know I kept a copy. "I kept a copy because I knew something was wrong and I don't like loose ends." She paused. "I also kept the original documentation from the account export because I had a feeling I'd need it someday." "Where is this documentation?" Rowan said. Marin looked at him for a long moment. The lobby was very quiet now. Somewhere above them, Dennis Hargrove was presumably hiding in his office or the server room or whatever craven corner he'd found. And somewhere in this building were the accounts that connected to whatever money had moved through Rowan Veth's organization, without his knowledge, and somewhere in the city whatever associates Dennis had promised that money to were already making phone calls. "It's at my apartment," Marin said, "on an encrypted drive." Rowan's expression was unreadable. "And you're telling me this?" "Because." Because," Marin said, and she was surprised to find she meant it. "Dennis Hargrove used me to sit in this lobby today as a human placeholder so that when your people came looking for him, they'd find someone first and he'd have more time to run. He fired me for doing my job correctly. He pulled me back here under false pretenses, and he didn't even have the basic decency to answer my texts from the lobby." She picked up the manila envelope from under the planter. "I spent 6 weeks being careful and professional and appropriate about all of this. I updated my LinkedIn. I wrote thank you notes to the colleagues who were kind to me on my way out." She looked at Rowan Veth, who was watching her with the fixed, unnerving focus of someone who had not expected any of the last 4 minutes. "I would like Dennis Hargrove to experience consequences. I understand you may be in a position to facilitate that." The silence stretched. From across the lobby, the broad-shouldered man with the scarred cheekbone called out, "Rowan." "Hargrove's assistant says he used the freight elevator. He left the building 20 minutes before we arrived." Rowan did not look away from Marin. "Of course he did," Rowan said quietly, and there was something in his voice, not anger precisely, but the cold compression of it, the way very hot things sometimes present as very cold. He studied Marin's face. Her scraped knee, the manila envelope in her hands, the blazer she'd ironed that morning. "Come with me, Marin Quill." "Where?" she said. "Somewhere that isn't here." He turned toward the exit, "and somewhere I can look at that spreadsheet." She followed him. She wasn't entirely sure why, except that her apartment was 20 minutes away by cab and she had nowhere else to be, and Dennis Hargrove had already taken everything from her that she'd been afraid to lose, and there was something clarifying about that. The car was black and armored and smelled of leather and clean air. Marin sat in the back with Rowan Veth, and that she was recalibrating. Because she was recalibrating. The city moved past the tinted windows. the canyon of glass and steel on Michigan Avenue giving way to the quieted streets of the near north, the lake flickering grey-blue between buildings. You said forensic accountant, Rowan said. Before Hargrove, I did litigation support mostly. Traced assets in divorce proceedings and fraud cases. She looked at her hands. One palm was slightly red from the marble. I was good at it. I left because the firm I worked for was ethically flexible in ways I wasn't comfortable with, and Hargrove and Finch seemed like a better option. Hargrove and Finch seemed like a place where I could do clean work and not have to wonder whose side I was on. She paused. I was wrong. Rowan was quiet for a moment. What did you do when you found the account discrepancy? I documented everything first. Then I went to Dennis. She looked out the window. That was the mistake. I trusted the process. I thought there were systems. I thought if you brought a thing to the right person, the right thing would happen. The cab turned north. I know that sounds naive. It sounds, Rowan said carefully, like something they teach you to believe. She looked at him. His profile was sharp against the window, the silver at his temples more visible in the daylight. He was looking straight ahead, not at her, but she had the sense he was aware of every micro-expression on her face. The money Dennis moved, Rowan said. It wasn't his to move, I gathered. He was managing a fund flow on behalf of my organization through a legitimate consulting structure, a structure that was supposed to be invisible. His voice was even. He skimmed $11 million over 14 months, using exactly the kind of entity chain you described. He used our accounts as the movement vehicle and diverted the excess to his own offshore positions. Marin processed this. He stole from you. He stole from me. And then when I found the trail, he panicked and fired you before you could take documentation to anyone external. Rowan's jaw tightened slightly. He was hoping the trail went cold. It did not go cold. Marin nodded slowly. The Gallagher filing, she said. Rowan turned to look at her. About 3 months after I was let go, she said, I noticed a reference in a court filing unrelated case. I was doing some freelance document review that mentioned a shell entity I recognized from my own research. It connected to a registered agent in Delaware that appeared in 3 of the 4 chains I'd traced from Hargrove's account. She met his eyes. The entity was listed as a creditor in a dispute involving the Gallagher Group. The temperature in the car seemed to drop. You know about the Gallaghers, Rowan said. It was not quite a question. I know the name. I know they're in a parallel business to yours. I know if Dennis sold those routing structures to them, he effectively handed them the keys to your financial architecture. She paused. That's what happened, isn't it? He didn't just steal, he sold. Rowan's expression had gone completely still, the way a body of water goes still right before something surfaces. Yes, he said. How long do you have before they move on it? 48 hours, possibly less. They need the master ledger index to access the offshore structures. Dennis claims he has it, if he's already delivered it. He hasn't, Marin said. Rowan looked at her. The index file is enormous. It's not something you email. It's not something you put on a thumb drive without a specific type of encryption protocol that has to be set up in advance. She was thinking out loud, the way she used to think out loud at her desk at 2 in the morning, when she was tracing the chains, and the pattern was almost there. The movement in October, there were a series of test transfers before the main skimming began. Small, exploratory. I think he was still building the delivery structure then. I think the index file is somewhere he prepared in advance. She looked at Rowan. Where does Dennis go when he's afraid? Rowan was watching her with an expression she couldn't entirely categorize. It was not the expression he'd had in the lobby. Something in it had shifted. Some layer of the cold assessment had given way to something more focused, more alert. He has a house, Rowan said slowly, on the North Shore. He bought it 3 years ago through an LLC. Is it in the same ownership cluster as the shell entities? Rowan said nothing for a moment. Then, Victor, The scarred man in the front passenger seat half-turned. "Get the team to pull the registered ownership chain on the Hargrove North Shore property," Rowan said. "Cross-reference against the Delaware agent list." Victor made a call. Maren leaned back against the seat. Her knee still hurt. She was aware, distantly, that she was sitting in an armored car with a man whose organization operated outside approximately every legal framework she'd spent her career adjacent to. She was also aware that in 47 minutes of sitting in a lobby, she had been used, abandoned, and left to face the consequences of someone else's crime. And the man sitting next to her, for all the ways he existed beyond the edges of the law, was the first person today who had asked her, listened what she knew, and then frightened to the answer. "You're not hurt," Rowan said, more like a careful observation. "I'm frightened," Maren said. "I'm just also angry. When I'm angry, the fear has to wait in line." The corner of his mouth moved barely a fraction of a degree. "You said you have an encrypted drive," he said. "At my apartment." "Yes. I need to see it." "I know." She looked at him steadily. "I'm going to let you. I want to be very clear about why, though. Not because I'm afraid of you. Not because I'm impressed by the cars or the men, or the fact that you walked into a building and the building just sort of surrendered. I'm letting you see it because Dennis Hargrove fired me for doing my job correctly, and whatever is on that drive is going to help you find him, and I want him found." She paused. "I want him to understand that firing me was the worst decision he ever made, and I want that to happen to him at a time when he has significantly larger problems than me." Rowan Veth looked at her for a long moment. "Maren Quill," he said, very quietly. "You are not what I expected to find in that lobby." "No one ever expects to find me anywhere," she said. "That's been the problem." Her apartment was on the 4th floor of a building in Lincoln Square. A good building, solid, with radiators that clanged in winter and a super who actually answered his phone. Maren's apartment was small and extremely organized, bookshelves on 3 walls, color-coded by subject matter, a kitchen where everything was in its designated drawer, a desk in the corner with 2 monitors, and a filing cabinet she'd labeled in her own small, precise handwriting. Rowan's men stayed in the hallway. He came inside alone. She was aware of him taking in the apartment, the books, the desk, the single dead plant on the windowsill she hadn't thrown out yet because she kept hoping it would recover. And she was aware of herself not apologizing for any of it, which felt like a small and significant thing. She went to the filing cabinet. 3rd drawer, back left corner. The drive was encased in a hard shell case she'd bought specifically because it could survive being dropped off a 2-story building, which had felt like unnecessary caution at the time, and now felt like foresight. Plugged it in. Entered the 16-character passphrase she'd chosen in October and never written down anywhere. "This is everything," she said. "The original account exports, my analysis document, the entity mapping, the timeline of transfers." She pulled up a folder. "And this is the Delaware Agent Registry cross-reference. I built it manually because I couldn't find a database that had all 4 entities in the same search. It took me 11 days. Rowan stood behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him, and looked at the screen. He was quiet for a long time. "This file," he said, pointing to one labeled North Shore Relcranchens. "Open that." She opened it. It was a network map she'd built in a charting program. Nodes and Connections LLC, names, registered agent addresses, the quiet arterial system of entities flowing between them. She had made it at 1 a.m. in November and then stared at it for 20 minutes because even she had been surprised by how clearly it all connected. Rowan exhaled through his nose. "The North Shore house," he said, "is in the same cluster. 3rd cluster from the left," Maren confirmed. "I flagged it because the registered agent was the same notary as 2 of the skimming entities. I didn't know what it meant at the time. I just knew it mattered." Rowan straightened up, reached for his phone. made a call in about 11 words, half of which were a street address, the other half of which Maren did not entirely hear. Then he put the phone away and stood very still for a moment in the middle of her small, organized apartment. "He's there," Rowan said. "My people confirmed the property chain an hour ago. He's been there since this morning." He looked at her. "The master ledger index. You're right that it would require a prepared delivery structure, which means he either already has the structure in place and is waiting to hand it off, or he's trying to set one up remotely and he doesn't have the technical capacity to do it without help. He'd need a specific type of encrypted tunnel," Maren said. "Proprietary. He couldn't build it himself." She paused. "He'd need someone to come to him." Rowan's eyes met hers. "The Gallaghers are moving people toward the North Shore. Then you have maybe 2 hours," Maren said. "Less. He was already moving." Then he stopped. He turned around in the doorway of her apartment and looked at her with an expression that was entirely different from any expression he'd shown her yet. Not the cold assessment of the lobby, not the sharp professional focus of the car, not the careful attention of the last 20 minutes. Something quieter, something that looked almost like he was choosing his next words with more care than usual. "Come with us," he said. Maren blinked. "What?" "Dennis set you up this morning. If the Gallaghers pull his file to understand who was in that lobby, who he used as cover, they'll have your name, your address." His jaw was set. "You are not safe here." She looked around her apartment, the books, the filing cabinet, the dead plant. "I can go to my sister's. Your sister lives 20 minutes from Dennis's North Shore property," Rowan said. He said it with such flat certainty that she didn't even ask how he knew. "Come with me. This will be over in a few hours." She looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" she said. His expression shifted. Something moved through it. Not quite something she could name. "You traced $11 million through 14 months of obfuscated transactions and built a network map in a chart program at 1 in the morning because you don't like loose ends," he said. "And then Dennis Hargrove fired you for it, called you back in to use as bait, and left you on the floor of his lobby." He paused. "I collect people who are owed debts they haven't been paid. Come with me." The North Shore was grey and cold, the lake enormous and pewter flat to the east. The Hargrove property sat behind a hedgerow at the end of a private road. A large colonial, white with black shutters, the kind of house that announced a certain tax bracket without saying anything interesting. Rowan's people had arrived first. 8 vehicles, quiet and coordinated. By the time Rowan's car stopped at the end of the private road, the property was already contained. Maren sat in the car. That had been the explicit agreement. She watched through the tinted window as Rowan walked up the drive with Victor beside him. Unhurried, the house lights visible through the grey afternoon. She watched the front door open. She could not hear what was said. She watched Dennis Hargrove appear in the doorway, pink-faced, soft around the middle, wearing a fleece vest that somehow perfectly encapsulated every wrong choice he had ever made. She watched him see Rowan Veth, and she watched his face do the thing that faces do when the consequence they've been outrun it. He tried to close the door. He tried to close the door. Victor's hand was already there. Maren watched, through the glass, as Dennis Hargrove was brought out of his house and walked toward the car. She didn't know what she expected to feel. She had imagined this moment in small, private ways since November, driving home from the office on her last day with a box of desk items in the passenger seat, updating her resume on her laptop at midnight, answering recruiters with careful professional optimism while feeling something much smaller and more defeated being wrong. Being found out. Being was.
Small.
Being small. That was the thing, faced with actual consequence. Dennis Hargrove was just a small, frightened man in a fleece vest, and she felt the hot satisfaction of that for exactly 3 seconds before it gave way to something more complicated. The car door opened. Rowan leaned in. He had the index file on a laptop, he said. The delivery structure wasn't finished. He hadn't transmitted anything. His eyes were steady on hers. It's over. Maren let out a breath she'd been holding since, she suspected, November. The Gallaghers, she said, will be dealt with separately. He paused. The documentation on your drive is enough to give my attorneys what they need, and to give federal investigators what they need if I choose to send it that direction, which I'm currently inclined to do, because Dennis is going to need someone official to surrender to. You're going to hand him to the FBI, Maren said. I'm going to make sure he has nowhere to go except toward the people who are already building a case, which will proceed much faster now that they have a roadmap. He looked at her, which was built by you. She sat with that for a moment. What happens to me, she said. Nothing bad, Rowan said, and he said it with such flat certainty that she believed it. You are a forensic accountant who built a documentation trail on a financial crime and preserved it. That is not a liability. That is an asset. He paused. To multiple parties. Are you offering me a job? She said. I'm telling you, Rowan said carefully, that people with your specific capacity are rare, and that the work you did on that drive was more thorough than anything my internal team produced in 14 months of looking at the same problem. He held her gaze. I am telling you that you spent 3 years making yourself invisible in a place that used that invisibility against you. And I am telling you that invisibility is only an asset when you choose it. Maren looked at him for a long time. The dead plant on my windowsill, she said. He blinked. A fraction of a beat. The first time she'd seen him look entirely unprepared for something. It's a pothos, she said. They're almost impossible to kill. The fact that I killed it is because I stopped looking at it. I kept telling myself it was fine. I had too many other things I was being careful about. She looked out the window at Dennis Hargrove, now seated in a separate vehicle, no longer her problem. I've been doing that with a lot of things. The car was quiet. Come back to the city, Rowan said. His voice was different now, still low, still deliberate, but without the professional distance. Like a door had been opened an inch. Let me take you to dinner. A real one, not a lobby and a pepper cup. You want to take me to dinner? I want, he said, with the careful precision of a man who did not often admit to wanting things. To talk to someone who built a 14-month financial investigation because they don't like loose ends, and I want to do it somewhere with actual food. The corner of Maren's mouth moved. I skipped breakfast, she said. I know. I'm going to order a real meal. Good. I'm going to have an opinion about it. I'm counting on it. She looked at him. This man who had walked into a building like weather and found her on the floor and listened when she talked and called her an asset like it was simply true. Which it was. Which she had known and been told by no one for years. And she said, okay. It was a small word. It was also the first thing she'd agreed to in months that didn't feel like making herself smaller. The restaurant he took her to was quiet and warm, and on a side street she'd walked past 100 times without going in. The maitre d' recognized Rowan and didn't make a production of it. Their table was in the back, private without being hidden. Maren ordered the branzino and a side of roasted potatoes and a glass of wine that cost more than her last month's freelance check, and she did not apologize for any of it. Across the table, Rowanveth watched her the way he'd watched the lobby, taking inventory, but differently now. Less assessment and more something she didn't have a clean word for, attention. The specific, focused variety that made her feel the opposite of invisible. The entity chain, she said, because work was the language she trusted most, goes deeper than what I mapped. I stopped at 4 degrees of separation, but I think there's a 5th. There is, Rowan said. We've been trying to trace it for 8 months. I'd need your internal records. You'd have to sign something. Of course. It wouldn't be straightforward work. None of the interesting work is, Maren said. Rowan reached for his wine. He was looking at her with that fractional expression she was beginning to catalogue, the one where the cold surface of him gave way by exactly 1 degree, like a window opening just enough to let the air in. "You know what you are," he said. "A liability you decided to keep. A liability," he said, "who handed me 14 months of evidence in a hard-shell drive case, who diagnosed a delivery structure problem in real time in the back of a car, and who remembered a Delaware-registered agent from a court filing she reviewed months after she was fired." His voice was quiet. "You are the sharpest person who has been in that car in years. And Dennis Hargrove fired you because you were right about something he didn't want to be right." Marin looked down at her wineglass. She'd spent a long time trying not to be the kind of person who needed to hear that. She'd told herself it didn't matter, that she knew her own worth, that external validation was unnecessary. She had believed that, mostly, but there was something in the way he said it, without performance, without trying to make her feel better, simply as an observation of fact that moved through her like warmth through cold marble. "I want the 5th entity chain," she said. "You'll have it Monday. And I want to know what happens to Dennis. He has no alternative. The documentation makes that his only viable option." "Good." She met his eyes. "I want him to say out loud in a room with a court reporter that he fired someone because she was right. I want it on the record." Rowan held her gaze. "That," he said very quietly, "I can guarantee." The food arrived. Marin ate it without apology, without making herself smaller around the edges, without pretending she wasn't hungry, or that the potatoes weren't exactly what she'd needed since 6 that morning. Across the table, Rowan Veth ate and watched her, and said things that were interesting, and she said things back, and the conversation moved the way good conversations do, without destination, without performance, carried along by its own current. Somewhere across the city, Dennis Hargrove was explaining himself to people far less patient than Marin Quill had ever been. Somewhere the Gallagher situation was being handled in ways she decided not to ask about in detail. Somewhere the federal case was being quietly fed the documentation it needed to proceed. Here there was Branzino and good wine, and a man who looked at her like she was worth looking at, not despite the ways she took up space, but because of every specific, uncompromising thing she was. She had spent a long time being the person no one saw in the room. She was done with that. When she walked out of that restaurant, she walked like someone who knew exactly what she was worth. And this time, she meant it.